A fist struck the table, sending various objects scattering from the impact. Tshirt brought both his paws to his face, the frustration mounting. As lead researcher on the project, he would be the one to take the brunt of the blame for these failures. He fetched the plans once more, placing them on the table and going over them with more attention to detail, speaking to himself out loud. So, we used Duff-Cross equation to compensate for the lack of a resonance matrix. Then that means... Perhaps I should get the math checked out again. This feels off. He looked around the lab, trying to find his assistants. Shri, Idis, I need you to check the math of this again. It's the only thing I didn't triple check. They nodded, taking the plans and going to their desks to review it. Specialized in this type of work, his assistants were some of the best at mathematics in all of Charcia. It was such an important job that so few could perform adequately. Tshirt took a deep breath to calm himself, walking towards the window to take in the sight. It always left him breathless how much they accomplished in so little time. The tall spires of Charcia spiraled up into the clouds. They hadn't needed to build them, of course, such was nature's work, but they had needed to work them, hollow them, and make them their own. The sun was still out, but would be disappearing behind the mountains soon. The temperature would drop along with his departure, reaching a low of 0 degrees. He looked forward to summer again, which would come in a few weeks. Personally, he found himself more comfortable at 15 degrees. 20s made him feel sluggish. The winds gently shook the window in their passing. They tended to be stronger at this level of altitude. Looking down, Tshirt could barely make out the individual people walking below. He missed living on the ground, but they all had to adapt when the Veek began attacking. He thanked the gods that they were at least adaptable. If only his damn project would work, all of this would be unnecessary. Tshirt, sir, called out Idis. He turned from the window, his hand trailing behind for a few more seconds pressed against it. Yes? He inquired. We found a mistake. A decimal point was off. I'm not sure how that happened. Shuri explained. Elation! It was an error, not his fault. Such joy filled him. Hope that it was the only thing missing. That he did not care whose mistake it was. Excellent. Let's adjust for the new values and run the test again. He approached the large brass and metal construction, his project Osiris. Nearly 2 decades of his life spent on this, and nothing to show for it, yet. The theories were sound, but no one had managed to make it work. Rumors spread that the only reason he still had the funds for this project was because of his sister. How it made him froth with rage when he heard these in passing. What fault of his was it that his sister was the matriarch? Once everything was adjusted and triple-checked, they stepped back. Tshirt nervously held the small copper lever in between his fingers. His heart raced, and he started considering failure once more. What excuse would he use this time? No, it will work. Have faith, he told himself. With some effort, he willed himself to flip the lever, the great gears coming to life as power filled them and they began turning. The whole mountain shook as the device started moving. The arch began glowing a soft blue, the steady hum of the machines accelerating. Suddenly, the blue hue exploded outward before coalescing back in between the arch. It seemed to sustain itself, becoming more fluid and material. With a flick of the lever once more, he shut off the machine. Time froze for a few moments, the blue portal steadying itself precariously. Tshirt stopped breathing, simply watching and hoping it would stay. Moments passed. The gaze still held, and he drew in a much-needed breath, the air filling his lungs. Tests would need to be conducted naturally, but he could not wait. He grabbed a long steel pipe from a corner of materials and slowly poked the portal. His assistants pleaded for him to stop and wait, but he did not listen. With a plop, the steel rod slid effortlessly through the blue substance. He waited a few seconds and retrieved it. Touching it and looking at it, it was no different than before, slightly colder if anything. He threw the rod down, gulping nervously at what he was about to do. He knew that others would urge caution, his sister included. He had to prove to himself that he succeeded, however. With bated breath, He stuck his hand in the portal, to the horror of his assistants, who proceeded to run out of the room, likely to get help. His hand felt odd. It was cold, but also wet. The wind blew on it, making him shiver. He withdrew his hand, looking it over. It was fine. He could discern no damage or changes to it. Filling his lungs, he went and took a step through the portal. A bright light flashed his eyes, causing him to close them as soon as he stepped on the other side. He held his breath in case something was wrong with the air, feeling the ground with his feet. It was cold and damp, a familiar sensation. Finally able to open his eyes partially, he looked over the landscape, rolling hills and tundra as far as he could see. Nothing quite like the towering mountain ranges of Thowin Earth, but familiar enough that it provided him some comfort. He spotted some vegetation, small green things that seemed to be densely packed and kept rather low to the ground. If plants lived here, then that meant that the odds of oxygen were much higher. Still, the mixture could be somewhat off, but it was a good sign. With his lungs starting to ache, he felt slightly confident enough to try drawing breath here. As a worst case, he could jump back through the portal just behind him. The cold air surged into his maw as he opened wide, refreshing him. Although he could breathe, and many times he drew breath, the implications simply left him breathless. He knelt on the ground, his hands grabbing a fistful of dirt and snow. Tears streamed down his face as he proceeded to lay back on the cold tundra's ground. His people were no longer doomed. They finally had an alternative path. Minutes passed as he simply relaxed until his brain began to think logically once more. He scanned the horizon, looking out for signs of life. Some movement caught his attention, and he whirled to look directly at it, his body already readying itself to jump through the portal at a moment's notice. A small furry creature lifted itself up on its hind legs, looking curiously at him. The creature's tail was nearly as big as his body, and it was barely the size of his hand. It scurried off quickly enough that he couldn't approach it. As far as he could see, this area was not populated by any advanced beings. They would have to determine if others lived on this planet, this world, before they could fully inhabit it. He did not want another problem like the Veek. They were truly lost if they had to fight two wars on two fronts. A loud howl woke him from his daydreaming. His fight-or-flight reflexes kicked in, increasing his alertness. The sound came from far away, echoing all the way to him. He swallowed hard, deciding now would be a good time to head back. He'd likely be disciplined for his rash actions, most notably by his sister, but that sounded like a better alternative than being eaten by whatever was out here. He backed away gently into the portal, turning around to find himself face to face with a dozen soldiers, all aiming their steam rifles at him. "Halt!" screamed one of the soldiers behind a makeshift barricade of tables and chairs. Chilukik stopped dead in his tracks, cold sweat forming in his back. He lowered his paws down slowly, turning them upward and spreading out his fingers, indicating he was no threat. The sight of the steam rifles scared him. The unstable contraptions were almost as likely to blow up as do their intended function of shooting steel spikes with the help of pressurized steam. At close range like this, the projector would eviscerate him with ease, but he hoped that the soldiers would hold off on shooting at him. One of them lowered his rifle and approached him, grabbing him by the elbow and moving him out of the way with little care for his comfort. He was forced to sit down as another of the soldiers went away. It returned shortly, escorting two figures behind it. The female standing behind the guard stepped up and raised her hand. It connected with moderate force against his face, likely leaving a bruise. "Of all the selfish, irresponsible, dangerous things you could have done," she spat out, half between tears and anger. Everyone present in the room felt quiet, trying not to interrupt the moment. Chilukik sat motionless and without saying a word, knowing it would only aggravate things. Finally, it seemed like her anger subsided, and she asked a question. "And? What was it like?" "It's perfect," he managed to croak out. "There is oxygen, some foliage, many hills, and the temperature is good. I noticed some wildlife, but no signs of a civilization." "I see," she nodded to herself. "We should organize a proper scouting mission then. Captain Oshrock, gather your 10 fastest runners and prepare them for a mission. We need to learn more about this world." The captain saluted, rushing to the barracks to find his men. "Tell me more." His sister sat down in front of him, taking one of the chairs from the barricade. The air was fresh, crisp even. The makeup seemed similar enough to our own that we shouldn't have problems. I ran a full analysis to be sure. The ground was cold but not frozen, some snow scattered a bit everywhere. Some areas seemed to have much more than others, likely from the winds. I only had a brief time, but I felt the stars' heat as well. It was very bright. A small creature crossed my path. It was very furry and seemed inoffensive enough. Just before I left, though, a loud howl scared me and I retreated. That'll likely be the apex predator of that world, I think. And you can turn off this portal at any time? She had a bit of worry in her voice. In theory, yes. It's self-sustaining right now, but we only need to add more power to it, and it would crash, came back his reply. Boots resonated, as nearly a dozen men came marching up the stairs and entered the laboratory. The captain reported to his sister, the matriarch. Matriarch, we are ready. Excellent. Your mission is to scout the area surrounding the gate, at least 2 kilometers in radius, and report back anything you find. Be on the lookout for signs of another civilization, wildlife, food, and strategic resources. She stood up, bowing before them. Our nation's fate is in your hands. You must succeed. The soldiers saluted her and proceeded to array themselves before the portal. Equipped with the mobile steam rifles, unlike the stronger, heavier version that required a steam core, they also wore small packs equipped with basic provisions and tools. To the scouts' credit, they did not show fear if they felt it, stepping into the unknown, one after the other. Go, rest now, brother. It will be many hours until they return. You'll need to be rested for what's to come. She laid her paw on his shoulder as she spoke. Chilukik relented. He knew there'd be no use to arguing with his sister on this matter. It was true that he was tired since he had not slept in a little more than a day and a half, a little over 25 hours by now. He made his way to his room, escorted by the captain. As he laid in his bed, sleep eluding him, he wondered how long the day and night cycles on this new world were. Would they need to change their measure of time? Too tired to think properly, he curled up into a sleeping position, falling asleep shortly after. When he awoke, he lost all notion of time. It felt as if he had slept far longer than he thought, but he didn't know for certain. A soldier was still posted at the entry to his room, however, and he went to talk with him. Has the expedition returned? He asked, yawning. Yes. The matriarch has told me to bring you to the laboratory as soon as you awoke. Follow me. The soldier's pace was quick, and Chilukik had trouble keeping up, breathing hard by the time they reached their destination. The laboratory had vastly changed since the last time he set foot in it. All non-essential objects had been removed, replaced instead with military hardware. 2 squads were present, likely posted there, keeping an eye on the portal as they patrolled the area. Another area had been created, separating the rest of the room with the portal room. He walked up with his soldier escort to the first exterior door, a guard posted at a small wooden table, looking at them, before granting passage inside. Captain Orshok, greeting the soldier escorting him, taking over for him. Glad you could finally join us, Chilukik. A lot has happened since your 1,000-year slumber. Surely you jest. I couldn't have been out for more than 6 or 7 hours, he asked incredulously. Make that 13. A few hours more and we'd have woken you up ourselves. You see, at this point in time, your expertise is required. The captain led him through the second set of doors, into the room with the portal, stepping through it. Chilukik followed him, finding himself on the familiar cold grounds of the new world. They had been busy. A small metal structure was being erected around the gate on this side, a dozen labourers lifting steel beams and bolting them together. Slightly further away, soldiers shoveled snow outward, away from the portal. A few meters away from the metal structure being built around the portal, a tent was installed, rocking slightly due to the winds. The captain made his way towards it, signalling to Chilukik to follow. Entering the tent, Chilukik saw the one person he was trying to avoid, his brother-in-law. Noticing him, the Takar mouth curved into a small, wicked smile. Ah, rested well, I presume? Now's the time for work. Sit down. I'll brief you on the current situation. Chilukik went to the nearest seat, an oval-designed chair with a large base that was reminiscent of an egg missing one side, where he slowly backed up, curling up with his tail in a small ball, uniformly filling every crevice of the chair. The warmth of the chair's material made him feel at ease and relaxed. The exploration team went 6 kilometers in radius from the portal's location and found no other intelligent life. A few creatures were spotted, some of them 4-legged and almost as big as us, but they seemed to only be wild. We're not ruling out other forms of civilization yet, but preliminary reports seem to indicate as such. Some trees were found to the south, not very tall, but it's a good indicator that the soil can support life. Mineral-wise, however, there appears to be an abundance of coal and iron which we're going to be extracting. The matriarch has agreed that an outpost be set up here to both help with the war effort and to start a colony, if all else fails. His brother-in-law, the matriarch's consort, paused, the words weighing on his tongue. She has also decided that you would stay on this side, overseeing this operation. What? Why me? Chilukik was confused. He was not much of a leader. Usually a position like this would go to someone fairly important in the army or politics. The tent flap opened, revealing his sister. Having overheard the conversation, she chimed in. Because, little brother, you are an excellent scientist, and that is what will be needed to help us thrive in this new world. We also need you to stay on the other side in case something happens with the portal to help reopen it. I suppose you're right. I'll admit that I'm very excited to run some tests and experiments here, so I can already see myself agreeing to this. What will we be doing exactly? The primary goal is to create an outpost. Lodging for all those who stay here, a storehouse for food as well. We'll try to gather as much as we can on this side, maybe create some greenhouses in the long run. There will be 250 workers, including you. Farmers, builders, engineers and soldiers, all will be needed for this venture, replied the matriarch. Well, let's get started then. I'll need my equipment and my assistance, ideally, demanded Chilukik. We're in the process of doing that after the other structures are installed. Ideas has already agreed, but Suri declined. Ah, I see. Well, I'll make do. So when do we start? Wondered Chilukik. She smiled. We've already started. The next 2 weeks passed by quickly, as everyone set about to their work. Chilukik got most of his tools and equipment transferred over. A small building was built to replace the loss of his laboratory, and hold what he needed for his experiments. The first thing he began working on was calculating the length of a day on this new world. It became apparent that a day was longer here when time was no longer synchronizing with clocks back home. The day seemed to go on forever, most Dakar getting sleepy before the sun had set. Chilukik set up monitoring devices, noting that the days were actually getting even longer. They adjusted their clock to 23-hour days. It was the closest estimation that Chilukik could do on the spot. Out of those 23, close to 6 would be during the night, while the rest would have starlight. 2 weeks later, and they were down to 5 hours of night only, making many wonder just how short the nights would get. Since there wasn't much he could do about it, he set out to make a list of priority experiments. Foremost on the list, everyone wanted to know why they felt heavier and sluggish here. Using a few astronomical tools, he was able to find out that this planet was more massive than theirs, which meant a higher gravity. A few more tests later, and he had managed to quantify it. The effects they felt would be akin to a roughly 16% increase in gravitational forces. Second, many wanted to be sure that the food and wildlife here could be consumed safely. The scouts managed to shoot one of the larger animals, a 4-legged creature with large defensive horns that ran quite rapidly, bringing it back to camp. A few checks were run, making sure the animal had no disease or carried any kind of venom, before one brave Dakar volunteered to try tasting it. 3 days later, and in perfect health, the creature was deemed safe to eat and aptly named tender meat. The days blended into each other, time passing by quickly but also quite literally, as for a few weeks the sun barely set for an hour. Normalcy did return after some time to the happiness of many who had trouble sleeping in the daylight. Construction endeavours had processed smoothly, especially with all the light. The outpost now numbered 24 permanent buildings. The mine shaft was now accessible as well, iron ore and high-quality coal being extracted daily from it. Chilukik woke up and stretched a bit, before grabbing a small breakfast on the go. Before going to bed last night, he'd read a report that one of the steam drills was having issues with the hard ground. He wasn't much of an engineer, but since he was in charge, he decided to go and take a look before the day started, taking a short stroll to the mining equipment lot in order to have a better idea of what to write in his report. He made his way around the machinery, looking for the proper one. A dozen slightly different machines were parked here, each having its own specific niche use. A sound of something hitting metal, a clank, echoed out from around him. Curious, he paused for a moment, wondering if some kind of critter would emerge. Paying closer attention, he made out a steady sound, higher pitched than any Dakar would make, and proceeded towards it with some curiosity. Something quickly darted away as he rounded the corner, emerging in the central lane of the parked machinery, having just missed it going behind another machine. More sound, similar to voices, were coming out from the east, and he looked up, seeing two strange bipedal figures standing on top of one of the machines. "Oh my, what are you?" Chilukek asked himself, squinting and trying to get a better look at the creatures. A crunch of some foliage being crushed next to him made him whip his head around, coming face to face with a strange creature. It was slightly shorter than him, perhaps closer to 2 meters, and was wearing some type of clothing unlike any he'd ever seen before. He barely had a momentary glance as the creature's shoulder rammed into him, twisting his body around and sending him to the ground with a loud thud. With the wind knocked out of him, he lay on the ground for a few seconds, thinking about his strange encounter. What was that? A bewildered Chilukek asked himself, painfully getting up.